Grace to you and peace from God our Creator and our Savior Jesus Christ. Today we celebrate the feast of the Epiphany, the visit of the Magi to the baby Jesus. And as I thought about how Epiphany connects to our current circumstances, I looked at the gospel reading and went through sort of what are the stages that this reading presents, and here they are. First, we look up. Second, we go out. Third, we give our gift. And four, we discover a new way. So first, we look up. There's a song by a singer that I used to listen to a long time ago named Fred Small. And there's a line in that says, "When gravity gets you down, look up." He means when you can't make sense of the everyday, you need to get a wider vision. Let's remember that the Magi are stargazers. They're astrologers. They can't make sense of the world by looking at it horizontally, because when they do that, all they see is Herod, another sign that the world has been taken over by the empire. Let's remember that this Herod is the one who is soon going to slaughter all the male children under 2 years old. This is the Herod who has taxed and taxed and taxed the people. And this is the Herod that will send this baby to his death on the cross in 33 years. So the Magi know that if they keep watching MSNBC or Fox News, they're just going to be stuck horizontally in despair. So instead of just complaining about the world, or instead of doing the other thing, which is just to totally ignore the world, they change their perspective. They stop looking straight ahead and they look up. Now, I've been teaching at Wake Forest Divinity School for 2.5 years. And I've sort of learned about call and response, which I understand is not our Episcopal tradition. But I'm going to give you a chance. Are you ready? When gravity's dragging you down,
look up.
That's great. You should come to Wake. So I once had a therapist that said to me, the problem with people is that they can't get enough of what they don't need. Takes a second. The Magi do not need any more news shows. They don't need to know any more about how Judea is divided. Because the truth is, some hate the Romans, some admire the Romans. Because all of that is a small, small story. They need to look up. They need to get a wider story. They need to get the story of the stars. So that's our first step, is to look up. And that means that we must not fixate on the current story of the news of today, but we must look up to see God's story. As the poet says, the clock indicates the moment, but what does eternity indicate? It's why Sunday after Sunday, we're called to lift up our hearts. And what we promise is to lift them up into the Lord. Because we're promising to be stargazers. We're promising that we won't be fixated on our clocks, but we will look to the heavens for a wider, larger, more redemptive story. Because if we do not, we will be narrow-sighted, narrow-minded, and we will fall into the sin of despair, which is the sin that infects our country. This is a new year. And therefore, anything is possible. Like the Magi, we must reorient our gaze. It is time for us to look beyond the surface story, what the clock indicates, and instead remembers what the stars indicate. The Magi were seekers. They weren't Jews, they weren't Romans, they were from Persia. And they traveled a long way because they had a vision. And they were willing to risk everything, wandering in the wilderness, guided by a star. because they had seen beyond what is to what could be. When gravity's dragging you down, look up. That was their task, and that is our task. Everyone here knows more than we want to know about what is wrong with our country. We know what the clock indicates. But what does God's promise indicate? It is time for us to lift up our hearts. It's time for us to recapture the dream that God has for this world. Peace, unity, food for everyone, medicine for everyone, clean water for Africa, clean air for India, a Congress that will actually govern, leaders we can believe in, hope for a new world. So first we look up. Secondly, we go out. Here's the thing. The Magi had a vision, and the vision kept them moving, sent them out. It's why the earliest name for the church was the Way. Because once we have caught the vision of Jesus, we have to move towards it. That vision gives us a glimpse of heaven, and that vision compels us to move out of our stuckness into a new world. This is why St. Francis refused to have the friars build any buildings. It's why he wouldn't let the friars have pockets, because he wanted them to always be free, always to be on the move, always to be part of the way. We have been given a vision by God of how we are to live this side of heaven. And today is the day where we're called to walk towards that vision. Even if it feels as if we're lost, even if it feels we're in the desert, even if it feels as if the only light we have is a star. I think of St. Francis walking to Jerusalem to ask the Sultan face to face if he would stop the Crusades. In our time, I think of Greta Thunberg, a 16-year-old girl, speaking to the UN to stop climate change. I think of Becca Stevens, who started Thistle Farm because her son, when he was around 6, saw a prostitute in Nashville dressed in a cat uniform and asked his mother, why would a grown woman have to dress up like that? We must stop fixating on our politicians and their endless rancor. We must move into the wilderness ourselves with a vision of a new world that is shining in the heavens. Because, my friends, our time on this earth is short, and the darkness is deep. And therefore, it is time for us to look to the light and move our feet. We cannot do everything, but we can do the next thing. Not in Washington, but in Black Mountain, North Carolina. None of the issues we face today as a country can be resolved quickly. And for those of us in our second half of life, I'm not going to ask you to raise your hand, you know who you are. Maybe those issues won't be resolved in our lifetime. But we are not on this journey for ourselves. We have looked up to the heavens. We have been given a charge by God to go in peace to love and serve the Lord. And that peace comes from loving and serving the Lord where we are. The peace comes from the vision in the heavens, and the peace comes from us moving out to be agents of transformation. Look up, move out, give your gift. Here's the amazing news. Christ isn't at the Grove Park Inn. Christ certainly is not in the walls of Congress arguing with our congressmen and senators. Christ is on the road ahead of you, waiting to see what you have brought with you. What is the gift of your life? What is the truth that your life has revealed to you? What is the light that you bring into a darkening world? And what matters is not the gift. What matters is that you give it. I mean, think about this story for a minute. What are Mary and Joseph going to do with frankincense and myrrh and even gold in the middle of nowhere with a little baby? Especially since they're going to be on the run from Herod in a few days. But what matters is it's the intent of the gift. It's the giving itself that matters. The Magi bring 3 puzzle pieces in the great jigsaw of God's kingdom. And that is our job. Our job is to give our lives for God's beloved community to come here on earth as it is in heaven. One gift at a time, one word, one act of generosity. And it doesn't mean we turn our lives inside out. It means that we become who God is calling us to be so that we can serve God in this world, in this place, in this time. Let's remember, Jesus was never very picky about what people had as long as they gave it. Feeding of the 5,000, the disciples come and say, how are we going to feed all these people? And what does he say? What have you got? They come to him and they say, how can we cure this man who is blind? And Jesus looks at him, and then he spits on his hands and takes the saliva and wipes it in the guy's eyes, and he's cured. They run out of wine at the wedding in Cana, and they come and say, how can we get more wine? And he says, it's not that hard. Fill up the jars with water. Because it's not the stuff that matters. It's our vision that matters. It's our journey that matters. It's our hearts that matter. It's our faith. It's giving the gift, whatever it is you have to give, for God to use to change the world. We think the problems we have are insurmountable, but that's an excuse for us. It's because we haven't looked up. We haven't moved out. We haven't offered what we have for God to use to change the world. We look up, we move out, we give our gift, and we find a new way. The new way opens for us once we give the gift. When I was in high school, there were only 2 reasons to go to school: sports and girls. I don't know if things have changed, but it was sports and girls. I was not a terrible student, but I wasn't a great one either. My sister, I have a twin sister who became a math major at Carolina. I would always had to take math class the period after she took math class, and the teacher, this is the truth, the teacher would look at me and say, I wish you were like your sister. And I would say, I can't tell you what I wish. So I wasn't a terrible student, but I wasn't a great one either. And honestly, little of what the teachers said were about anything important to me. Sports and girls. One spring day in my junior year of high school, I was staring at my girlfriend in English class. And the teacher, Julia Capps, who's now gone on to glory, began reading this poem. A thing of beauty is a joy forever. Its loveliness increases. It will never pass into nothingness, but still will keep a bower quiet for us and a sleep full of sweet dreams and health and quiet breathing. Something happened to me. I looked up. My consciousness received this gift of poetry and beauty, and I found a new way. My life was different because I became aware of this whole new world, and from then on, school was more than sports and girls. I ventured into this land of poetry, and as a result, I became an English major in college and an English teacher until I became ordained. And as you may know, poetry has been part of my life for the past 52 years. This past semester, I taught a course at Wake Divinity School about using poetry in sermons. One spring day in a hot classroom at Lee Edwards High School in Asheville, North Carolina, something lifted my gaze. Something sent me out. Something gave me a gift and pushed me into a new way. My brothers and sisters, this is the season of Epiphany. The star still shines, beckoning you to look up, beckoning you to venture out, beckoning you to give your gift and find a new way. May it be so. Amen.